The fluorescent light in the east corridor of Mercy General was doing that thing again. The half-second stutter every 40 beats, like a pulse that couldn't commit. I'd been counting. 37, 38, 39, a flicker. I'd been a paramedic at this hospital for 9 years, and I'd been counting that flicker for 6 of them. Nobody had ever fixed it. Nobody ever would now. I was on the second floor, East Wing, trying to get into the pharmacy lockup because we had a 13-year-old in the triage bay downstairs with a femoral bleed and no morphine left in the rig. That was the task. That was the only thing in my head. Find the key, open the cage, grab what I could carry, get back downstairs. Simple. The kind of task that tricks you into thinking the world still has procedures. The hallway was empty in a way that hospital hallways shouldn't be. Not quiet. I could hear the parking structure from the open stairwell window, the constant low sound that had become the city's new ambient frequency. A moan that wasn't wind. A shuffling that wasn't foot traffic. It had been 19 hours since the first call came through the dispatch. And already that sound had become background. The brain is obscene in its efficiency. It will normalize anything to keep you functional. I found the pharmacy door propped open with a rubber doorstop. That should have been my first sign. Pharmacy lockup at Mercy General required a badge, a key, and a 6-digit code. Someone had bypassed all 3 and left the door wedged like a break room. I went in anyway, because the 13-year-old was still downstairs, and her name was Priya, and she'd been asking for her father in a voice that was getting quieter each time. The shelves were half stripped. Opioids gone. Antibiotics gone. Someone had been systematic, taken the high-value items, and left the rest in near-perfect order. Not a panicked grab, a shopping list. I found a box of ketamine ampules that had been overlooked, some lidocaine, a handful of midazolam vials. I shoved them into my cargo pockets and was turning to leave when I saw the paper. It was taped to the back of the pharmacy door at eye level. Standard printer paper, landscape orientation. At the top, in a typeface I recognized from every internal hospital memo I'd ever received, it read, Mercy General Hospital, Confirmed Survivor Registry, FEMA Region 8, Evacuation Priority List, page 3 of 7. Below that, a numbered list of names, staff mostly. I recognized about half of them immediately. Dr. Carla Voss, attending surgeon, Kevin Mallory, respiratory therapist, Angie Dutton, charge nurse from the ICU. Names I'd worked beside, eaten lunch near, nodded at in hallways for almost a decade. My eyes went to the M's, the way your eyes always go to yourself in a photograph. Marin Lisk, number 47. My name. My full name, spelled correctly, which almost nobody gets right on the first try. Assigned an evacuation number, listed alongside people I'd last seen alive. And it was crossed out, not scribbled, not hastily struck. A single clean line, drawn with a ruler or the edge of a card in red ballpoint. Precise, deliberate. The kind of line a person draws when they've made a decision, not a correction. I stood in the pharmacy and stared at my own deleted name and felt something I hadn't felt in the previous 19 hours of crisis. Personal fear. Not the professional fear that kept me moving, the one that sharpened my hands and quickened my triage. This was the other kind. The kind that dissolves your skeleton from the inside. Someone had decided I was dead, or decided I should be. I pulled the paper off the door and folded it into my chest pocket. Then I went back downstairs to give Priya her ketamine, because she was still alive, and I was still alive. And the fluorescent light was still counting to 40. And at least one of those 3 things I could do something about. The triage bay had been our ambulance intake. Now it was a room with 11 people in it, most of them horizontal. I found Priya on a gurney near the wall, her left leg pressure-wrapped with what looked like a torn scrub top. Dinesh, one of our EMTs, was holding pressure with both hands and looking at me with an expression I knew. The expression that says, "I've been doing this for 20 minutes and I can feel it's not enough." "Ketamine," I said, pulling the ampule. 0.5 per kilo. What's she weigh? 43 kilos, maybe 45. We'll go 20 milligrams. I drew the dose. My hands were steady, which surprised me, because I could feel the folded paper against my chest like a coal. "Priya, hey, my name's Marin. I'm going to give you something to help with the pain, okay? You're going to feel a little strange, like a weird dream. But I'll be right here." She looked at me. 13 years old, enormous dark eyes, a face that hadn't decided whether to be a child's or a woman's. "Is my dad coming?" "We're going to find him," I said, which was the first lie I'd told that day, though it wouldn't be the last. I pushed the ketamine. Within 30 seconds, her eyes went glassy and distant, and her breathing eased. And Dinesh and I had a window to work. While I repacked the wound, I told Dinesh about the list. He didn't stop applying pressure. "Where?" "Pharmacy, taped to the door." "FEMA list?" "Formatted that way. Typed. Official-looking header. Page 3 of 7. And you're crossed out?" "Red pen, ruled line." Dinesh was quiet for several seconds. He was 26, built like a distance runner, and had the kind of face that defaulted to calm even when his pulse was racing. I'd worked with him for 2 years, and I'd never seen him panic, which in our field either meant he was exceptionally composed or he hadn't yet hit the thing that would break that composure. "Who else was crossed out?" he asked. I hadn't checked. I'd seen my name and stopped looking. I pulled the paper from my pocket, unfolded it one-handed, while keeping pressure on Priya's dressing with the other. Page 3. Names 35 through 51. 17 names. 4 were crossed out. Mine and 3 others. Luis Ochoa, night custodian. I'd last seen Luis at the start of shift yesterday, filling the soap dispensers in the ambulance bay restroom. Crossed out. Tomoko Reinhardt, lab tech, blood bank. I hadn't seen her at all today. Crossed out. And Dr. Neil Atchison. Neil. My chest did something complicated. Neil Atchison was the attending physician who supervised our EMS teams. He was 51, methodical, private, and the only doctor at Mercy General who regularly addressed paramedics by first name. He'd written my annual performance reviews for 6 years. He'd signed the overtime approvals that let me keep my apartment after the divorce. He knew my name well enough to spell it right. And his name was on the list, uncrossed, present, confirmed survivor, evacuation priority. Dinesh, who has access to the printer network for administrative memos. Department heads, administrative staff, IT. And who has the pharmacy key code? He looked at me over Priya's unconscious form. Department heads. Neil's the EMS department head. Marin. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking who had the means to print a list on hospital letterhead, post it inside a locked room, and make annotations. Dinesh didn't answer right away. Through the triage bay windows, something moved in the parking lot. The jerking, arrhythmic gait that I'd already learned to identify without looking directly. 2 of them. Then a third. They were gravitating toward the building the way water finds a drain. "We need to move everyone off the ground floor within the hour," I said. "Help me stabilize her and then we move." But I kept the list in my pocket. And I kept Neil Atchison's uncrossed name in the front of my mind. And for the first time in 9 years at Mercy General, I realized I didn't know what my department head would do with a red pen and a reason. Moving 11 people up a stairwell sounds simple until 3 of them can't walk. And one of them is a sedated 13-year-old with an open femoral wound. We had 2 functional gurneys, 1 wheelchair with a squealing front caster, and 6 people still capable of carrying weight. The math was ugly. I organized the evacuation the way I'd been trained to organize mass casualty transports, priority-based, with the most critical patients moving first. Priya went up on a gurney. An elderly man named Howard, who'd come in with chest pain before the world changed and now had nowhere to be discharged to, went on the second gurney. The rest moved under their own power or leaned on someone who could. Dinesh and I took the rear, which meant we were the last ones on the ground floor when the east entrance gave way. I didn't see it happen. I heard it, the particular sound of a pneumatic door mechanism failing, followed by the heavier sound of a body hitting tile at the wrong speed. Not falling, arriving. "Go," I said. We went. Up the stairwell, through the fire door onto the second floor, and I pulled the door shut and engaged the magnetic lock, standard issue hospital fire door, rated for 90 minutes against flame. Nobody had ever rated it against what was now pressing itself against the other side. The east wing of the second floor was administrative. Conference rooms, offices, a small break room with a coffee machine that someone had left running. The smell of burnt coffee was so aggressively normal, it made my throat tighten. I turned it off. We arranged the patients in the largest conference room, a space I'd sat in hundreds of times for mandatory training sessions, listening to PowerPoints about blood-borne pathogen protocols while eating stale donuts. 15 minutes of fragile quiet, people settling, Priya's sedation holding, Howard's cardiac rhythm stable enough. The others either sleeping or pretending. I used the quiet to look at the list again. This time I read every name. Page 3. 17 names. 13 uncrossed. 4 crossed out. I didn't have pages 1, 2, or 4 through 7. I didn't know how many total names there were. I didn't know who compiled the list, who posted it, or how long it had been there. But I knew something structural about it. This wasn't a head count done by flashlight during a crisis. The formatting was clean. The header referenced FEMA Region 8 and used the correct regional designation. Someone had either accessed an official template or created one convincing enough to pass casual scrutiny. And that meant one of 2 things. Either FEMA had actually generated and distributed this list, which implied a level of organized federal response that contradicted everything I was seeing outside, or someone inside this hospital had built it themselves. And the question became, why? I found Dinesh in the break room, filling water pitchers from the tap while it still ran. "I need to find Neil," I said. "3rd floor. He set up a secondary triage in the cardiac ward 6 hours ago. Took whoever could still stand and work." "He's been 1 floor above us this whole time?" Dinesh set down the pitcher. "He came down once, about 4 hours ago. Took supplies. I told him you were on a pharmacy run. He said..." Dinesh paused. "He said to tell you not to go above the 4th floor. Why?" He didn't say. I figured it was a contamination issue. 5th floor is where they brought the first ones in, before anyone knew what this was. The 5th floor, the original intake point. The place where Mercy General's first infected patients had been admitted as fever cases and put in standard isolation rooms, and where presumably those rooms had not held. Neil Atchison had been working 1 floor above me for 6 hours. He hadn't come to check on our triage. He'd taken supplies and left a warning and vanished back up the stairs. I looked at the list. His name, uncrossed. Mine, negated. "Stay with the patients," I said. "If Priya's sedation wears off, Redose at half. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Marin, what are you going to do? I'm going to go ask Neil why he thinks I'm dead. The stairwell between the second and third floors smelled like iodine and something older. Copper, maybe, or the ghost of copper. The magnetic lock on the third-floor fire door was engaged from the inside, which meant someone up there had made the same calculation I'd made one floor below. Lock the doors, control the access, make the floor a sealed unit. I knocked. The sound echoed in the concrete stairwell in a way that made me immediately regret it. 30 seconds. Then the lock disengaged and the door opened 6 inches, and I was looking at a face I didn't recognize, and a woman in her 50s. Short gray hair, wearing a patient gown with a hospital ID badge clipped to the neckline. Not staff. A patient who'd been given a staff badge. I'm Marin Lisk, paramedic, EMS. I need to see Dr. Atchison. The woman studied me with the particular expression of someone who has been told to look for something specific. Wait here, she said, and closed the door. The lock re-engaged. I waited in the stairwell. From below, through 2 floors of concrete, I could hear the sound from the east entrance, dull, persistent, arrhythmic. They were still coming in. Not many. Not yet in the numbers I'd seen in other parts of the city during my last ambulance run. But the building was no longer sealed. The lock clicked. The door opened, fully this time. Neil Atchison was standing in the hallway behind it. I'd worked under Neil for 6 years. I knew his face in every clinical context. Calm during a code, focused during a briefing, tired during an overnight. I had never seen the expression he was wearing now. It was careful, controlled in a way that went beyond professional. He was looking at me the way you look at a lab result you weren't expecting. Marin, he said, come in. The cardiac ward had been transformed. Beds rearranged into a tighter configuration. Supply carts organized with military neatness. A whiteboard on the wall covered in lists, timelines, and a crude floor plan of the hospital with colored markers indicating something. Zones, maybe. Clearance levels. I couldn't read it from the doorway. Neil had maybe 20 people up here. More than our group. Better organized. I recognized a few faces. Staff. The rest were patients or civilians who'd made it to the hospital seeking help and found this instead. You look intact, Neil said. He said it the way a mechanic says an engine sounds clean. Diagnostic. I am intact. When did you last go outside the building? 11 hours ago. Last ambulance run. Picked up Priya. 13-year-old, femoral laceration. She's stable downstairs. Any contact during the run? Physical contact with the infected? No. He nodded. The careful expression didn't change. I pulled the list from my pocket, unfolded it, held it up so he could see the header, the names, the 4 red lines. I found this in the pharmacy. Want to explain why my name has a line through it. Neil looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. Then he did something that rearranged my understanding of the next several seconds. He turned and looked down the hallway behind him as if checking who was listening. Not here, he said. My office. Neil's office at Mercy General was a windowless room the size of a large closet. Desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a framed diploma from the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and a photograph of his 2 daughters that I'd seen every time I'd sat in this room for a performance review. The older one, Bethany, was a sophomore at CSU. The younger one, Grace, was 16. I'd met them once at a hospital fundraiser. They had his jaw and their mother's patience. He closed the door, sat behind the desk, gestured to the other chair. It felt absurd. The formality of it, the office meeting choreography persisting, while the building slowly filled with the dead from below. But I sat, because I wanted answers more than I wanted to acknowledge absurdity. "The list is real," Neil said. "FEMA Region 8 distributed it through the Emergency Medical Network at 0600 this morning. 13 hours ago, it came through the hospital's administrative email before the servers went down. An evacuation priority list. A staging list, identifying confirmed survivors at designated medical facilities who would be prioritized for extraction once military transport could be coordinated. And I was on it. Every active duty staff member was on it, automatically, based on employee ID and badge-in records. And then someone crossed me off." Neil opened his desk drawer. I heard the familiar sound of a pen rolling against wood. He pulled out a red ballpoint, same brand as the one I'd buy from the hospital gift shop when I lost mine. He set it on the desk between us. "I crossed you off," he said. The fluorescent light above us was steady. No flicker. 3rd floor, different circuit. "At 0800 this morning," he continued, "I received a second communication. Not emails, shortwave radio, military frequency. FEMA had updated the extraction protocol. The original list was being used by a field triage team to locate and transport survivors. But the protocol had changed. They were no longer simply evacuating. They were screening. Screening for what? Exposure. Any individual on the list who had been in physical proximity to confirmed infected within the previous 12 hours was being flagged for. The language they used was containment processing. Not evacuation, processing. I thought about my last ambulance run. 11 hours ago. The call that had brought Priya in. The streets I'd driven through. The intersections where I'd had to reverse because the road was blocked by people who were no longer people. The moment when something had hit the side of the rig at a stoplight and I'd seen fingers, still fingered, still human-shaped, scraping the passenger window. "I didn't have contact," I said. "You ran calls through the active zone for the last full shift before containment protocols were declared. 12 hours in the field. Closest ambulance to the initial cluster site. Your run logs are in the system, Marin. Any screening team with access to dispatch records would flag you immediately." "Flag me and do what?" He didn't answer right away. The red pen sat on the desk like evidence. "I crossed you off," he said, "because the list is how they find you. The extraction teams aren't coming to save everyone on the list. They're coming to sort us. And the ones flagged for exposure screening don't come back from it. I spoke to a paramedic at Denver Health on the shortwave before it went dead. She said the screening site at Buckley was... She said they weren't screening. They were containing. Permanently." The room was very small and very still. "You crossed me off to hide me." "I crossed you off so that when they arrive with their clipboards and their manifest, your name isn't on it. You're not a survivor to be extracted. You're not a flagged contact to be processed. You're nothing. A clerical absence, a name that was there and then wasn't." And Luis Ochoa? Tomoko Reinhardt? Both had exposure window overlap. Luis was on the loading dock when the first wave came through the parking structure. Tomoko processed blood samples from 3 patients who later turned. I crossed out anyone whose logs would trigger the algorithm. I looked at the photograph of his daughters. Bethany at CSU, Grace at 16. "And you didn't tell me because?" "Because I didn't know if you'd come back from that last run. And if you didn't come back, it didn't matter. And if you did..." He paused. "If you did, I needed you to come find me, not the other way around. I couldn't be seen going to the 2nd floor to warn someone I'd erased. The list has to look administrative. A routine correction, not a cover-up. Neil, Are you telling me the United States government is executing medical workers flagged for proximity exposure? He picked up the red pen, clicked it once, set it down again. I'm telling you that when the extraction team arrives, you should not be on this floor. You should not be findable. And you should not assume that anyone in a uniform is coming to help. I left Neil's office and walked back through the cardiac ward. The people up here looked better organized than our group on the second floor. Calmer, more supplied, more structured. Neil had built something functional. He'd always been good at systems. Annual reviews, supply chains, shift rotations. He understood that survival was administrative before it was physical. You didn't live because you were strong. You lived because someone put your name on the right list, or took it off the wrong one. In the hallway, I passed the gray-haired woman who'd opened the fire door. She was sitting in a plastic chair outside one of the patient rooms, watching the corridor with the steady attention of a person who'd been assigned a task and intended to complete it. Sentry. Neil had organized sentries. How long have you been here? I asked her. Since last night. I was in for a knee replacement. Surgery was scheduled for this morning. She gestured at her gown. Didn't happen. What's your name? Dolores Kane. Marin Lisk. I'm a paramedic downstairs. Dolores studied me again with that evaluating expression. Dr. Atchison said we might get visitors from the lower floors. He said to let the ones he named through and keep the door locked for everyone else. He named me? He named 3 people. You were one. The other 2, I assumed, were Dinesh and someone else. I didn't ask. I was still processing the information Neil had given me and trying to decide what it weighed against what I already knew. And the 2 amounts weren't balancing. Here was the problem. Neil's explanation was coherent. It was tactically sound. It accounted for the red pen, the precision of the line, the choice of names. It was exactly the kind of explanation that a careful, systematic man would provide. Logical, protective, built on verifiable details. The shortwave communication, the Denver Health paramedics' testimony, the shift from evacuation to screening. But it was also unfalsifiable. The shortwave was dead. The Denver Health paramedic was unreachable. The extraction teams hadn't arrived yet. Everything Neil had told me required me to trust him. And trust in an environment like this was a resource I couldn't afford to spend on the first plausible story I heard. I went back to the stairwell, stood between the 3rd and 2nd floors, and listened. Below, the sound from the east entrance had changed. More bodies. Not a wave, a trickle, but steady. The ground floor was slowly filling with the dead, and our sealed fire door on the 2nd floor was rated for 90 minutes against fire. And nobody knew what it was rated for against persistent, patient, mindless pressure. I descended to the 2nd floor and found Dinesh exactly where I'd left him. What did he say? Dinesh asked. I told him. All of it. The FEMA list. The extraction protocol change, the screening sites, the red pen as protection. Dinesh listened without interrupting, which was one of the things that made him good at his job. When I finished, he said, "Do you believe him?" I believe that he believes it. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. Through the conference room windows, I could see the parking lot. Afternoon light. The shadows of the things down there moving in patterns that weren't patterns. Random, thermotropic, drawn to warmth and sound, without strategy. Among them, I could see 2 vehicles that hadn't been there an hour ago. Military vehicles, olive drab, parked at the edge of the lot, angled like they'd arrived in a hurry and stopped without regard for the lines. I couldn't see anyone around them. No soldiers, no uniforms, no megaphones announcing salvation. Just the vehicles, and the dead between us and them. They came in through the west entrance at 14:47. I know the time because Dinesh had been keeping a watch log on a yellow legal pad. Time, event, observation. And he wrote it down as the sound of coordinated boot falls echoed up and through the stairwell. Military. 4 of them, from what I could hear. Moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had cleared buildings before, though I doubted their training had included the specific variable of reanimated patients in the radiology wing. I was in the second-floor break room when I heard the first gunshot. Suppressed, a flat, mechanical snap rather than the concussive blast of an unsuppressed round. Then 3 more in quick succession. Then silence. Then boots on stairs. "Stay here," I told the room. 11 faces looked at me with 11 varieties of the same expression. Priya was awake, her sedation wearing thin, her eyes tracking me with the focus of a child who has decided that one adult in the room is the one keeping her alive. I went to the fire door and listened. On the other side, footsteps ascending, confident, unhurried. The lock was engaged from our side. I waited. A knock. 3 even beats. Then a voice, male, controlled. "Medical staff. We're with the 4th Infantry Division, Fort Carson. We're conducting an extraction of confirmed survivors per FEMA Region 8 manifest. If there are staff or patients on this floor, please identify yourselves." The manifest. The list. My name, crossed out. I looked back down the hallway. Dinesh was standing 15 feet behind me, and his face told me he'd heard every word and arrived at the same conclusion I had. I opened the door. There were 4 soldiers, fully kitted. Body armor, helmets, rifles with suppressors, the matte olive uniformity of a unit operating under orders. The one in front was a woman, early 30s, with a lieutenant's bar, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in 2 days, but had been trained to function anyway. "Lieutenant Carrie Vasquez, 4th ID, she said. "How many on this floor?" 11 civilians, 1 additional EMT. I'm Marin Lisk, paramedic. She had a tablet. Ruggedized, military grade, screen glowing with a document I couldn't read from my angle. She looked at it when I said my name. Scrolled. I watched her eyes. Her eyes stopped scrolling. She looked at me, back at the tablet, back at me. Lisk Marin, paramedic, EMS. She read it without inflection. Then, "You're not on the active manifest." I know. The active manifest is the extraction priority list. If you're not on it, I don't have authorization to transport you. There are 11 other people on this floor. Most of them are on no list at all. They're patients and civilians who came here for help. Lieutenant Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A recalculation. We can take confirmed staff who are on the manifest. Civilians without exposure flags can be processed through secondary screening at the staging area. And staff with exposure flags? She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds too long. That's a different protocol. What protocol? Ma'am, is there a Dr. Neil Atchison on the 3rd floor? He's listed as department head, EMS. The pivot was seamless, professional, trained. She hadn't answered my question, and she wasn't going to. And the smoothness with which she moved past it told me everything Neil had said was true. Or close enough to true that the difference didn't matter. 3rd floor, I said. Fire doors locked from the inside. You'll need to knock. Lieutenant Vasquez signaled 2 of her team upward. Then she looked at me again with an expression that I can only describe as triage. She was sorting me. Alive, dead, or something in between. A name on a list or a gap where a name had been. Stay on this floor, she said. We'll process everyone here once we've cleared 3 and 4. She moved toward the stairwell. I let her go. Then I went back to Dinesh. "We need to get off this floor," I said. Dinesh didn't argue. He'd heard enough through the hallway acoustics to understand that processing was a word that had changed meaning, and that the people with guns were not the rescue we'd been praying for. The problem was logistics. 11 people, 3 non-ambulatory, 1 exit route that wasn't the stairwell where the soldiers were ascending. And that route was the elevator shaft. Mechanical, non-functional since the power fluctuation started, but accessible via the maintenance panel in the hallway ceiling. "We're not putting Priya in an elevator shaft," Dinesh said. "We're not putting anyone in the shaft. We're going through the ceiling maintenance access to the HVAC corridor. It runs the length of the building above the second floor. There's a service ladder at the far end that drops into the loading dock stairwell." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been a paramedic in this building for 9 years, and I once spent 45 minutes in that corridor helping maintenance find a dead raccoon in the ventilation system." Dinesh looked at me as if evaluating whether a dead raccoon story was sufficient basis for an evacuation plan. He apparently decided it was. "How much time do we have?" "They're clearing the 3rd and 4th floors. Call it 20 minutes before they come back to process us." We moved. I told the group we were relocating. Not why, not where, just that we needed to go now and quietly. Most of them were too frightened or too tired to question it. Howard, the cardiac patient, looked at me from his gurney with the resigned clarity of a man who has accepted that his life is in someone else's hands and is simply hoping those hands are competent. Dinesh and I lifted the ceiling panel. The HVAC corridor was exactly where I remembered. A low, dusty crawl space running between the ceiling of the 2nd floor and the floor of the 3rd. Wide enough to move through on hands and knees. I went first with a penlight in my teeth. Moving 11 people through a ceiling crawl space takes longer than 20 minutes. I knew this before we started. I knew we wouldn't make it before Lieutenant Vasquez returned to find an empty conference room and began asking questions. But the alternative was staying and hoping that processing meant something benign. And I'd seen the lieutenant's face when she read my name against the manifest. That face didn't have benign in its vocabulary. Priya was the hardest. Dinesh lifted her through the ceiling opening while I guided her from above. She was lucid enough to be scared and sedated enough to be compliant. And she held my hand in the dark with a grip strength that seemed medically improbable for a 13-year-old with a femoral wound. "It's okay," I told her. "We're just going through the ceiling, like a fort." "This isn't like a fort," she whispered. She was right, and I admired her for saying so. We moved in a line through the crawl space. Slow, painful. Howard had to be pulled on a makeshift sled of cardboard and packing tape that Dinesh constructed in 30 seconds with the quiet genius of someone who builds things under pressure without thinking about it. The sound of knees on metal ductwork was louder than I'd hoped and quieter than I'd feared. Halfway through the corridor, I heard voices below us, through the thin ceiling panels, muffled but unmistakable. Lieutenant Vasquez's team on the 2nd floor, finding the conference room empty. I heard a radio crackle, a clipped exchange, the word relocated, the word sweep. I stopped the line, held up my hand. 11 people breathing in a metal tube, trying to be silent. Priya's grip on my hand tightened. Below us, boots moved in patterns. Searching, systematic. We waited. 3 minutes, 5. The boots moved away toward the east stairwell, searching in the wrong direction because they expected us to go down, and nobody had thought to check up. We kept moving. The service ladder was where I remembered it, a fixed metal ladder dropping through a vertical shaft into the loading dock stairwell. I went first. The stairwell was empty. The loading dock door was closed but unlocked. I helped them down one at a time. Priya, then Howard, on his cardboard sled lowered by rope we'd made from knotted bedsheets, then the rest. It took 19 minutes. Every one of those minutes was a year. When the last person was down, I looked back up the shaft into the dark crawl space we'd come through. I could hear, very faintly, the sound of the soldiers clearing the floor above. They'd find the open ceiling panel eventually. They'd figure out the route. But we had a head start measured in minutes, and minutes were the only currency I had. The loading dock faced west, away from the parking lot where the military vehicles were stationed. That was the first piece of luck we'd had. The second was that the dock's roll-up door opened onto an alley that ran between Mercy General and the parking structure of a shopping complex. And the alley was, for the moment, empty. I say empty. I mean empty of the living. There were 3 of them at the far end of the alley, near the street, standing in that terrible parody of idle. Motionless until triggered, faces slack, bodies held upright by whatever mechanism had replaced volition. They hadn't noticed us yet. Nobody talks, I whispered. Nobody runs. We walk. We stay close to the wall. We go left at the end of the alley, away from them. 11 people and 2 paramedics, moving through an alley at the pace of the slowest member, which was Howard in his wheelchair, salvaged from a docking area supply closet, squealing front caster and all. The sound of that caster on the asphalt was, to my ears, approximately the volume of a fire alarm. In reality, it was a small, intermittent squeak. But my adrenal system had recalibrated what constituted dangerous noise, and everything above silence qualified. We made it to the end of the alley. The 3 figures at the far end hadn't moved. We turned left into a service road that ran behind a row of commercial buildings. Dumpsters, delivery bays. The detritus of a commercial district that had stopped receiving deliveries 19 hours ago and would never receive them again. Dinesh fell into step beside me. Where are we going? It was the right question, and I didn't have an answer. We'd escaped the hospital. We'd evaded the extraction team. We were outside with 11 people, 3 of whom couldn't walk. In a city that was actively being consumed by something we didn't understand, heading in a direction chosen solely because it was opposite the direction of the last threat. That's not a plan. That's a reflex. The fire station on 9th, I said. Station 7. It's 6 blocks south. If any structure in this city is defensible and stocked, it's a fire station. You think it'll be empty? I think the crews deployed hours ago and haven't come back. I think the building is locked, but I know the door code because I've picked up patients there. And I think it has walls, supplies, and no list with my name on it. We moved south. 6 blocks. In the old world, a 7-minute walk. In this world, an expedition across terrain that had been reclassified from urban to hostile in less than a day. I put myself at the front and Dinesh at the rears, and I told everyone in between to watch the person ahead of them and do what they did. Block 1, clear. Block 2, we had to detour around a city bus that had jumped the curb and come to rest against a hair salon. The bus was occupied. I didn't let anyone look inside. Block 3, Priya's wound started bleeding through the dressing. I stopped the group in the doorway of a dry cleaner and repacked it with supplies from my cargo pockets. She watched me work with that same focused gaze. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. "We're going to get to the fire station," I said. "That's the next thing, just the next thing. Block 4, Block 5. The sound of the city had changed to fewer car alarms, more of the other sound. The ambient frequency was rising. The dead were accumulating at a rate that felt exponential, and the living were disappearing into whatever shelters they'd found or failing to find them. Block 6, Station 7. Red brick, 2 apparatus bays, American flag still flying from the pole out front. The bay doors were closed. The personnel door on the south side had an electronic keypad. I punched in the code I'd memorized 3 years ago during a routine patient transfer. The light went green. The door opened. The station was dark inside and cool and empty. And it smelled like diesel and laundry detergent and the ordinary Tuesday it had been when the crews left and didn't come back. I held the door open and counted 12 people through it, including myself. Then I locked it behind us. Fire stations are built for quick response, not for siege. But they have advantages that most buildings don't. Thick walls, minimal ground floor windows, heavy bay doors designed to withstand vehicle impact, backup generators, medical supplies, and enough canned food in the kitchen to sustain a crew through a 72-hour shift cycle. Station 7 had all of this, plus something I hadn't expected. A functioning radio. Not shortwave, but the fire department's dedicated VHF system. Battery-backed and still receiving. I found it in the watch office. A red LED blinking on the console, like the building's heartbeat. I didn't touch it immediately. First, we secured the building. Checked every room, every closet, every bay. Clear. The apparatus was gone. The crews had taken both engines and the ladder truck when they deployed. What they'd left behind was more useful to us than a fire truck. Medical kits, oxygen tanks, thermal blankets, a full kitchen, 2 showers with hot water from the gas heater, and bunks for 14. I put Priya in a bottom bunk in the crew quarters and changed her dressing properly for the first time since the hospital. The wound was deep, but clean. A laceration, not a bite, sustained when she'd fallen through a glass door while running. She'd been running from something she described only as the man from the bus. A passenger on her school bus who had changed in front of her during the morning route. She told me this calmly, in a voice calibrated to prevent herself from crying. And I recognized the calibration because I used it myself. "You did the right thing," I said. "Running was the right thing." I left Maya. She was sitting next to me. I left her on the bus. "You're 13. You ran. That's survival, not abandonment." She looked at me with an expression that suggested she understood the difference between those two things better than I was giving her credit for. With the group settled and Dinesh managing distribution of food and blankets, I went back to the radio. The VHF system was tuned to the department's tactical channel. I listened before transmitting. Static, mostly. Then, intermittently, fragments. A voice identifying itself as Engine 12, requesting backup at an intersection I knew was 4 miles north. No response. The voice repeated. No response. Then silence. Then another voice, different station, different unit, reporting that they were trapped in a school gymnasium with approximately 80 civilians, and that the building was no longer tenable. Then silence. I listened for 18 minutes. In that time, I heard 7 transmissions. None received a response. The fire department's communication network was still functioning, but no one was coordinating. Calls went out and met nothing. The infrastructure existed, but the institution behind it had dissolved. I changed the frequency to the emergency management channel. More static, then, abruptly, a clear transmission. A male voice, steady and official. All medical facilities within FEMA Region 8. Extraction teams are on site at designated locations. All confirmed survivors on the active manifest should remain in place for processing. Repeat. Remain in place. Do not attempt independent relocation. Extraction teams will locate and transport all listed personnel. This message will repeat. It repeated. Every 90 seconds, word for word, the cadence of a recording. I turned the volume down and sat in the watch office chair and thought about Neil Atchison drawing a clean red line through my name with a ruler. I thought about Lieutenant Vasquez's face when she scrolled to the gap where I should have been. I thought about the word processing and how many meanings it had been asked to hold in the last 12 hours. And I thought about the 4 soldiers now searching Mercy General for 12 missing people, and whether their search would extend outward, and how far, and how soon. Dolores Kane found me in the watch office an hour later. She'd changed out of her hospital gown into a set of firefighter's workout clothes she'd found in a locker. Gray sweatpants, a Station 7 t-shirt that hung to her knees. The transformation was striking. In the hospital gown, she'd been a patient. In the t-shirt, she was a person. "I need to tell you something," she said. She sat in the other chair, the one usually reserved for the station captain during shift briefings. She folded her hands in her lap with the precision of someone who has rehearsed what she's about to say. "Before Dr. Atchison sent me to watch that door, he gave me instructions, specific instructions about you." "What instructions?" "He said that if you came to the 3rd floor, I should let you through and call for him. He said you would probably be angry. He said to let you be angry, but to watch for signs." "Signs of what?" Dolores unfolded and refolded her hands. "Infection. He said you'd had extended field exposure and that there was a non-trivial chance you'd been compromised without knowing it. He said the early symptoms present as mood dysregulation, impaired thermoregulation, and pupil asymmetry. He asked me to observe you and report." The room didn't change. The red LED on the radio didn't stop blinking. The air didn't get thinner. But something between my lungs shifted the way tectonic plates shift, imperceptibly, but with consequences. "He told you I might be infected. He said it was precautionary. He said you were probably fine, but he asked me to watch." "Dolores, I'm not infected. I've had no contact, no bites, no scratches, no fluid exposure. My last ambulance run was through the active zone, but I was in the rig the entire time. I believe you. I'm telling you because you should know what he said. And because—" She paused. "Because the instructions he gave me don't make sense if his only goal was to protect you." She was right. If Neil had crossed my name off the list purely to hide me from the extraction teams, why would he simultaneously assign a civilian to monitor me for infection symptoms? That was contradictory. Either he was protecting me from a system that wrongly flagged me, or he was suspicious of me himself and hedging his protection with surveillance. Or, and this was the thought I didn't want to have, he was performing protection, giving me a plausible reason to trust him while keeping me observed, managing me, the same way he managed shift schedules and supply chains and annual reviews, systematically, with contingencies. "Did he give you any other instructions?" I asked. "He said that if you showed signs, I should tell him immediately and that he would handle it." "Handle it." His word. I looked at Dolores Kane. 50-something, bad knee, supposed to be in surgery today. Instead, she was sitting in a fire station wearing borrowed clothes, telling me that the man who claimed to save my life had also asked someone to watch for signs that I was dying. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me. You seem like someone who prefers to know things. I'm a paramedic. Knowing things is the entire job." She stood, paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I've been watching you for several hours. Your pupils are equal and reactive. Your thermoregulation is normal. Your mood is appropriate for the circumstances. By Dr. Atchison's own criteria, you're clean." She left. I sat with the radio blinking and the FEMA recording cycling, and the dead accumulating outside, and the fact that Neil Acheson had drawn a line through my name with one hand and assigned a watcher with the other. And I tried to decide which of those hands was telling the truth. At some point, the sun went down. I hadn't been tracking it. Dinesh came in and told me, practically, "It's dark. We should set a watch schedule." And I realized I'd been sitting in the watch office for over 2 hours, listening to the radio cycle the same recording while my mind ran scenarios. We established a 4-shift rotation. Dinesh took first watch at the apparatus bay doors, which were our most vulnerable point. I took the south-facing personnel door, the one I'd entered through, where I could also monitor the radio. The station was quiet. People slept or pretended. Howard's cardiac rhythm had stabilized, which I attributed to the fact that he was finally lying in a real bed, eating real food, instead of being dragged through a hospital ceiling on cardboard. Priya slept curled on her side in the bunk, one hand hanging over the edge. I covered it with a blanket when I passed. At 2200, the radio changed. The FEMA recording stopped mid-sentence. Silence. Then a new voice. Different timbre, different cadence, female, and not recorded, live. "This is a priority communication for all units in the Denver Metro Corridor. The extraction protocol for FEMA Region 8 has been updated. All survivor manifests distributed prior to 1800 hours today are to be considered compromised. Repeat. Compromised. A revised manifest will be transmitted to verified receivers within the next 4 hours. All extraction teams are ordered to suspend operations until the new manifest is confirmed. Any individual identified on the original manifest who is not present on the revised version should be considered a person of interest. Acknowledge on this channel." No one acknowledged. The transmission repeated once, then went dead. Static resumed. I sat in the dark and parsed the language. The original manifest. The one with my name on it. The one Neil had annotated with his red pen was compromised. A new manifest was coming. And anyone on the old list but absent from the new one was a person of interest. This changed everything. If Neil's story was true, if he'd crossed me off to protect me from the extraction screening, then the new manifest might not include me at all, and I'd be safe. But person of interest didn't sound like safety. It sounded like a category upgrade, from not on the list to specifically being looked for. Or maybe the manifest was compromised in a different sense entirely. Maybe the original list had been tampered with by people like Neil, and the military had caught the discrepancy. Maybe the red lines on page 3 weren't invisible. Maybe they were exactly the kind of anomaly that a systems review would flag. Neil had tried to erase me from the system, but systems don't forget. They reconcile. They audit. And when the audit comes, the gap where my name was isn't a gap at all. It's a signal, bright and obvious, that someone reached into the record and made a change. I picked up the radio handset. I didn't transmit. I held it and felt its weight, and thought about the one thing I could do that Neil hadn't anticipated. I could put myself back on the list. If the new manifest was being compiled, and if there was any way to reach the people compiling it, I could identify myself, confirm my status, submit to screening. If Neil was right about what screening meant, I'd be walking into containment. If he was wrong, if screening was actually screening, I'd be walking into evacuation. The handset was warm from my palm. The static hissed like the sound between stations on a car radio, like the sound of the world tuning itself to a frequency no one had chosen. I set the handset down. Not yet. Not until I knew more. I slept for 90 minutes, sometime around 3 in the morning. Not intentionally. my body simply stopped participating in consciousness and restarted an hour and a half later with the abruptness of a power outage. I woke in the watch office chair, neck wrenched, radio still cycling static, and the first gray light of day pressing against the station's narrow windows. I went to the south-facing window and looked out. The street was different than it had been at nightfall. More of them, not a crowd. They didn't congregate with enough intention to form a crowd, but a density, 30, maybe 40, visible in the 2-block stretch I could see. Some standing, some walking, one sitting on the curb like a person waiting for a bus, except that her head was tilted at an angle that living cervical vertebrae don't permit. And at the end of the block, parked in the intersection, a military Humvee, engine off, doors closed, no visible occupants. But it was there, and it hadn't been there at midnight, and it was angled toward the fire station in a way that didn't feel coincidental. I found Dinesh in the kitchen, heating water on the gas stove. The simple domesticity of it. Steam rising, a ceramic mug. The smell of instant coffee was so disproportionate to the world outside that I almost laughed. "There's a Humvee at the end of the block," I said. He didn't look up from the water. "I know. It arrived at 04:30. I watched it from the bay window. 2 soldiers got out, walked the perimeter of the building, got back in. They've been sitting there since. They found us. Or they found the fire station and they're staging. It's a logical rally point. Dinesh, they're parked facing our front door at 4:30 in the morning, 12 hours after we escaped a building they were searching." He poured the water, stirred the coffee, set the spoon down with care. "What do you want to do?" What I wanted to do was the thing I couldn't justify. I wanted to walk out the front door, approach the Humvee, identify myself, and end the uncertainty. Accept whatever screening meant. Stop running from a system I wasn't sure was hostile and find out, conclusively, whether Neil was right. The problem was that conclusive knowledge, in this case, might come at the cost of my ability to act on it. If I walked into screening and it was what Neil described, I wouldn't walk back out. And if I didn't walk out, 12 people in a fire station would lose the only paramedic who knew the door code. "I want to talk to them," I said. From inside, through the radio. Dinesh looked at me for the first time. "You want to announce our position on a military frequency." They already know our position. The Humvee is right there. What they don't know is who's inside and what we need. I want to establish communication before they establish control. And if they tell you to come out for screening, then I'll know what we're dealing with. I went back to the watch office, changed the radio to the military coordination frequency I'd memorized from the overnight broadcasts. Keyed the handset. "This is Marin Lisk, paramedic, formerly assigned Mercy General Hospital. I'm at Fire Station 7 with 12 civilians, including 3 non-ambulatory and 1 adolescent with an open femoral wound requiring surgical intervention, requesting medical assistance and clarification of evacuation status. Over." The static held for 10 seconds, 15, 20. Then a voice, male, young, slightly uncertain in a way that suggested he was newly tasked with answering transmissions and hadn't expected a real one. "Station 7, this is Forward Operating Post Kilo. We copy your transmission. Stand by for verification." "Stand by." Verification. The bureaucratic machinery of survival, grinding forward even as the world it administered was grinding down. I waited. 3 minutes. 5. The young voice came back. "Station 7, be advised. Your name appears on the revised FEMA manifest as of 0600 today. You are listed as a confirmed survivor. Priority 2. Cleared for immediate extraction. A medical team will be dispatched to your location within the hour. Please confirm the number of civilians and any immediate medical needs. I stared at the radio. My name. The name Neil had crossed out. The name Lieutenant Vasquez couldn't find. The name that was supposed to be invisible was back on the list. On the new list. The revised one. Cleared. Someone had put me back. Station 7. Do you copy? Please confirm. I keyed the handset. 12 civilians. 3 non-ambulatory. 1 adolescent, open femoral laceration, needs surgical intervention. 2 possible cardiac cases. We need a medical transport, not a screening unit. Confirm the team coming to us is medical. Over. A pause. Then. Confirmed, Station 7. Medical evac team. ETA 45 minutes. Please have all civilians ready for transport. Out. I set the handset down. My hands were trembling. Not from fear, from something closer to chemical release. The physiological aftermath of sustained adrenaline, meeting a sudden reduction in threat. I pressed my palms flat on the console until the tremor stopped. Dinesh was in the doorway. I heard, "I'm back on the list." "Who put you back?" I didn't know. The new manifest had been compiled after midnight, after the original was declared compromised. Someone with access to the system had added my name. Neil, maybe. Reaching into the administrative network one more time, correcting his correction. Or the system itself, rebuilding from employee records, restoring what had been removed. Or something else entirely. Someone else. "It doesn't matter," I said. "They're sending medical. 45 minutes. And you trust that?" I thought about it. I thought about Neil and his red pen, and Dolores watching my pupils, and Lieutenant Vasquez sorting me with her eyes, and the recording that said processing, and the voice that said screening, and the night I'd spent parsing the distance between those words. "I trust that Priya needs a surgeon," I said. "And she's not going to get one in a fire station. I trust the math." They arrived in 38 minutes. 2 vehicles. An armored ambulance and a support truck. Not the same unit from Mercy General. Different markings, different demeanor. The medics who came through the door were wearing surgical gloves and carrying litters, not rifles. The lead medic was a staff sergeant named Yoon, Korean-American, mid-40s, with the calm efficiency of someone who has triaged under fire and found it clarifying rather than destabilizing. He assessed our group in under 5 minutes, identified Priya as the priority, and had her on a litter with a fresh IV line before I'd finished explaining the wound history. "You're Lisk?" he said to me while his team worked. "Yeah. Someone flagged your record this morning. Priority notation. It said..." He checked a printed sheet from his vest pocket. It said, "Lisk, Marin, field paramedic, essential personnel, erroneously removed from original manifest. Restore immediately. Notation submitted by Dr. Neil Atchison, Mercy General, 0530. Neil, at 5:30 in the morning, while I was sleeping in a fire station chair, Neil Atchison had gone back into whatever remained of the administrative system and put my name back on the list. Not just restored, annotated, flagged as essential, erroneously removed. He'd built a paper trail that transformed his red line from a deletion into an error, and the error into a correction, and the correction into a priority. He'd covered me twice, once by erasing me, once by restoring me. Belt and suspenders, he'd have called it. Systems thinking. "Is Dr. Atchison still at Mercy General?" I asked. Yoon's face did something controlled. Mercy General was evacuated at 0300. Staff and patients from the 3rd floor were transported to the staging area at Buckley. And the 2nd floor? I don't have information on the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor. The conference room we'd abandoned. The fire door I'd locked behind us. Had anyone else been there after we left? Had the soldiers found anyone, or had they found what we'd left? Empty beds, a burned coffee machine, a ceiling panel hanging open like a mouth. The staging area at Buckley, I said. Is that where we're going? That's the medical facility. Priya needs a surgical team. The rest of your group will be processed. And before you tense up, I mean intake processing. Medical evaluation, decontamination, assignment to refugee housing. I've been doing this for 13 hours. Nobody's being disappeared. I promise you that. He said it the way a person says something they've had to say too many times, with exhaustion underneath the conviction. I looked at him. 45, surgical gloves, printed manifest, tired eyes. A person doing a job that had been redefined overnight and trying to do it the way it was supposed to be done. Okay, I said. We loaded. Priya went in the ambulance with Yoon's team. The rest of us went in the support truck. Bench seats, dim overhead light, the rumble of an engine built for durability rather than comfort. Dinesh sat across from me. Howard sat next to him, wrapped in a thermal blanket, alive against all reasonable expectation. Dolores Kane sat beside me and said nothing. But her hand found my forearm and rested there, warm and deliberate. The truck moved through streets I'd driven thousands of times in an ambulance. I couldn't see them, no windows in the back. But I could feel the route in my body, the turn onto 6th, the long straight of Colorado Boulevard, the ramp onto the highway. Every turn was familiar, and every one was irreversible. We weren't going back to the fire station. We weren't going back to Mercy General. We were going forward into whatever the new system had built in the last 24 hours. And I was on its list now. Name uncrossed, cleared, confirmed. Priya's blood was still on my hands. I hadn't washed them. I looked at the brown stain on my fingers. Her blood, her survival, the physical evidence that I'd kept someone alive through a night that was designed to kill. And I left it there. I wasn't ready to wash it off. Not yet. It was the most honest thing on me. The staging area at Buckley was a gymnasium, or had been. It was cots now, hundreds of them, arranged in rows with the impersonal precision of people who have learned to fit the maximum number of human lives into the minimum amount of space. Priya went into surgery 20 minutes after arrival. I was told she would likely keep the leg. I looked for Neil. He wasn't in the gymnasium. He wasn't in the medical processing area. A clerk with a tablet told me that Dr. Atchison had been reassigned to a field hospital at an undisclosed location, effective 0630 minutes after he'd submitted the notation that put my name back on the manifest. He'd restored me, and then he'd vanished into the system he'd spent the night trying to outsmart. I sat on a cot and unfolded the list one more time. Page 3 of 7. My name, Marin Lisk, number 47, with a clean red line through it. I ran my finger along the line. The ink was smooth and dry and precise, drawn by a hand that was trying to save me from a distance in the only language it knew. Administrative, institutional, systematic. A line through a name that meant I was here. I saw the danger. I did what I could with what I had, which was a pen and a list and the willingness to falsify a federal document for someone I supervised for 6 years. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. I didn't need it anymore, for evidence. I kept it for the same reason you keep anything after the emergency is over. Because someone's handwriting is proof they were alive when they made the mark. And sometimes, that's the only record that matters. Outside the gymnasium, the world continued its slow, irreversible change. Inside, a clerk called my name from across the room, pronouncing it wrong. And I stood up and walked toward the sound of it. Because I was still here, and my name was on the list. And for now, just for now, that was enough.